Today we're going to make our Picasso portraits out of clay. We're going to start by cutting out the template that we drew last time. We're going to use this to trace around to get the shape of our portrait. So we're going to have our slab of clay, and we're going to have a sharp tool used for cutting. Now I have to make sure that my portrait shape fits on my clay slab, and it looks like mine barely fits. If yours is a little too big, you might have to make some adjustments in a few areas to make it fit. There we go. Once I get it the right size, I'm going to trace around with my sharp cutting tool. I want to make sure that I hold my tool straight, not slanted one way, and I also have to make sure I press all the way through the clay so that it cuts all the way down to the plastic mat beneath. Okay, so I'm just holding it kind of in place with one hand and then pulling it nice and straight along the outside edge of my portrait. And I can remove the little pieces that I cut off as I go, but I'm gonna set them off to the side in a little pile because I'm gonna use those scraps for extra details. Just like this. Now I'm going to save my template because these shapes are going to remind me what shapes I need to add to the portrait once I have it cut out. Now when I start adding details, there are 3 different ways I can do it. The first way is cutting out shapes from a slab. So I'm going to just really carefully kind of lift up this portrait piece and scooch it to the side of my plastic so that I have a little more space to work. That will also help make sure that your portrait doesn't get stuck to the plastic piece. If you press real hard, sometimes it can get a little sticky. Now I'm going to take this other piece and I'm going to start by cutting out this shape for my first eye. Now I'm not going to actually cut it out and trace it. I'm just going to kind of eyeball it so that I can get it the right size and shape. So I'm going to take my cutting tool and I'm going to draw that half circle. Just like that. Cutting it out just the same way I did my original shape. And if I think it might be a little too big, I can just always change the shape of that. That's the easy thing about clay. We can squish it and cut it and change it, mush it up and start over again. All right, now when I have a shape that I think I like, I cannot just leave it setting on the clay like that because it sticks right now while the clay is wet, but when the clay is dry, it will no longer be sticky and it will fall right off. So what I need to do when I'm adding shapes is I need to slip and score. So scoring means I'm going to use a pointy tool to scratch and tear up the back of my shape, and then I'm going to score a little area on the other piece of clay where I'm going to stick it on. Then I'm going to add just a couple little drops of water and then wiggle that shape into place. Those little torn up bits of clay and water will act like a glue to hold your piece in place. Now, the other way that we can add shapes is with coils. This is a really good way to do some lines that might be on your project. Like my nose isn't really a full shape, it's kind of just a curved line. So for this one, I'm going to take a lump of clay in my hand and I'm going to kind of squish it into a hot dog shape or like an oval shape a little bit. And once it's an oval, I'm going to start rolling it out into a long coil. You can make your coil as thick or as thin as you like. I usually try to make mine a little bit thinner than my pinky. Once I have my coil, I can lay it on my portrait where I think it needs to go. And I'm going to kind of just mush it around until it looks the way I want it to. And if it's too long, I can just tear it off. Now you can slip and score your coils on, but it's kind of tricky because they're so skinny. So sometimes what I do to get them to stay is I smooth the ends into the portrait. So I'm just using my fingers to kind of smear it together. Just at the ends. I don't want to smear this part because I want that to stay three-dimensional so that people can still see the shape. I'm going to keep on going, adding coils and shapes until I'm happy with my portrait. The third and final way that you can add details to your portrait is with texture. We can create texture by pressing different things into the clay to create different designs. Now the secret about doing this is you don't want to push all the way through the clay because that would cut your portrait apart, and we don't want to do that. We're just pressing into the very top layer of the project. So I could use a piece of cardboard, pressed just barely into the clay to create different lines. And we also have other tools that we can use this way. One of my favorites is marker caps. They can be used to make different designs as well, especially if you have them in different sizes. So this is a really fun way that you can add some different designs, different parts of your face if you didn't have time to cut out shapes or make coils. You can think about creative ways to use these texture items to finish the rest of your project. Another great tool to use is your cutting tool, because if you only scratch the top part of the clay, you can draw on the clay almost like a pencil. Just make sure that you sort of wipe off the extra clay bits as you go along so that you don't have too many little scratchy pieces of clay flaking off of your project. When you are done with all of your shapes, coils, and texture, then your portrait is complete. All we need to do is leave it to dry so that it can go into the kiln.